When we gaze inward, we encounter a silence that is both haunting and holy. The soul, that ancient and invisible thing, does not shout, it waits. It waits for us to grow quiet enough to hear it, to turn away from the noise of the outer world and descend into the living mystery that breathes beneath consciousness. And yet, few dare to make that descent. We are afraid not of what we might lose, but of what we might find. For the soul is not the gentle garden of peace that we imagine it to be. It is a vast landscape of paradox, populated by gods and monsters, light and shadow, love and terror. It contains the whole drama of existence, written not in words but in symbols that speak directly to the blood and the dream. To truly know oneself is to venture into this interior wilderness and to accept that the psyche is not merely personal but cosmic, that within each of us resides the full measure of human possibility, both divine and demonic. When I speak of the depths of the soul, I do not speak poetically. I mean the living reality that lies beneath our everyday awareness, the unconscious. It is that deep ocean beneath the fragile surface of the ego. The ego, small and shining like a lantern, believes itself to be the center of existence. But it floats upon waters far older and more powerful than itself. These waters hold our forgotten memories, our ancestral instincts, our fears, our unlived potentials. They also hold the strange and sometimes terrifying forces that shape our fate. To descend into those depths is to confront the truth that we are not the masters of our own house. The unconscious acts upon us with an authority that the ego resists but cannot deny. It speaks through dreams, through synchronicities, through sudden impulses and inexplicable moods. It may seize us in obsession or depression or mania, what we call illness, but which may also be the psyche's attempt to restore balance. The unconscious corrects the arrogance of consciousness by reminding us that there are forces beyond our control, gods. We have forgotten, but who have not forgotten us. One of the most terrifying discoveries in the study of the soul is that evil is not something external, but something within. We prefer to imagine it as out there in the tyrant, in the criminal, in the stranger. But the first step toward wisdom is to realize that the potential for destruction lies in our own hearts. The shadow, that hidden side of the psyche, is the dark twin of the ego. It contains everything we have disowned, rejected, or denied: our greed, our cruelty, our envy, our lust, our cowardice, but it also contains our strength, our passion, our creativity, all the energies we have suppressed to preserve the illusion of virtue. When the shadow is ignored, it does not disappear. It grows, it seeps into our behavior in unconscious ways. It is projected onto others, onto nations, races, lovers, enemies, until the world becomes a mirror of our inner conflict. The wars of humanity are born first in the wars within the individual soul. The one who cannot face his own darkness will seek it in others. And thus the world burns with the fire of unrecognized shadows. But to face one's shadow is to experience a kind of death. The ego, accustomed to its superiority, trembles before the truth of its incompleteness. It resists the notion that it is but a fragment of the total psyche, that it cannot contain the whole of what we are. The descent into the shadow feels like madness, precisely because it dismantles the familiar order. It demands that we meet ourselves as strangers, that we accept the unacceptable, that we admit I am not who I thought I was. Yet only through this death can something greater be born. In the darkness of the unconscious lies the seed of transformation, as the alchemists understood Nigredo. The blackening is the first stage of creation. The dissolution of the old form precedes the emergence of the new. In psychological terms, this means that the confrontation with the shadow is not destruction, but preparation. It is the fertile chaos from which the deeper self begins to emerge. This self, call it the God within. The totality of our being cannot be approached through pride or intellect. It reveals itself only to those who have surrendered their illusions of control. The ego must learn humility, must bow before the mystery of the psyche, as one bows before the sacred. This humility is not weakness. It is the beginning of wisdom. In modern life, the greatest danger is not external catastrophe, but inner emptiness. Man has lost his connection to the depths. He lives in a shallow world of surfaces, a world of glittering screens and restless appetites. He seeks meaning in consumption, in distraction, in endless movement, but the soul does not speak to the one who never stops to listen. We build great towers of technology and yet tremble with loneliness. We call ourselves free and yet are enslaved by our unacknowledged drives. We mistake stimulation for aliveness, forgetting that true vitality arises only from within. The modern man, for all his brilliance, suffers from what I once called the loss of the symbolic life. He no longer believes in myth, in ritual, in the language of the unconscious. But the psyche does not vanish simply because the ego ceases to believe the gods return, not as sacred figures, but as symptoms. That which we refuse to honor in the inner world reappears in distorted form in the outer. Thus, the divine becomes pathology. Our gods have become diseases, our repressed energies manifesting as anxiety, addiction, obsession, and despair. This, too, is terrifying to realize that the unconscious is autonomous, that it acts with its own intelligence and purpose. It is not a passive reservoir, but a living reality, shaping us even as we deny it. To be unaware of this is to live under the tyranny of unconscious forces. One becomes a puppet of one's own complexes, reacting rather than choosing, repeating patterns. One does not understand. To awaken to this truth is painful, but necessary. For only when we see how deeply we are possessed by the unseen can we begin to reclaim our freedom. And yet, what is freedom? Not the freedom to do whatever one pleases, that is merely the whim of the ego, but the freedom to become who one truly is, to realize the self, to live in alignment with the deep pattern of one's being. This process, which I have called individuation, is the central task of life. But it requires courage, the courage to endure the terror of one's own depths. To face the unconscious is to risk disintegration. It is to confront forces that can shatter the fragile structure of consciousness. That is why many turn away, preferring the comfort of ignorance. But those who persevere, who endure the tension between opposites, discover something extraordinary. The unconscious is not merely dark. It is also the source of healing, of creativity, of renewal. The same depths that terrify us also contain the wisdom that can save us. In this sense, the psyche is like the earth itself, its surface civilized and cultivated, but its core molten and alive. The eruptions we fear are also the source of fertility. The soul's earthquakes destroy, yes, but they also make space for new creation. The terror is not the end. It is the beginning of depth. So, my friends, if you would truly know yourselves, you must not flee from fear. You must not cling to the light while denying the dark. The soul demands wholeness, and wholeness is born only from the union of opposites. To descend into the depths is to encounter both terror and grace, to discover that the two are but faces of the same mystery. And perhaps if we are willing to go far enough, we may realize that the darkness we feared was never meant to destroy us, but to lead us home to that eternal center of the psyche where opposites meet, where the individual and the divine become one. The journey into the soul does not proceed in a straight line. It unfolds in spirals, descending and ascending through layers of consciousness, like a pilgrim wandering through a labyrinth whose center is both the source and the goal. Each descent brings us closer to something ancient within us, something that existed before we knew ourselves as individuals. It is there in the quiet shadows beneath the surface of thought that the first of these terrifying depths is encountered, the realization that our consciousness is but a fragile spark in an immense darkness. Most people cannot bear this thought for long. They imagine the self as the master of reality. But when the light of the ego flickers, they sense the vast, impersonal night surrounding it. They feel the weight of all that is unknown, not only in the world, but in themselves. For beneath every conscious thought lies an ocean of instincts, emotions, and forgotten lives, whispering their truths in symbols and dreams. This is why the first step toward true understanding is humility. We must admit that we do not fully know ourselves. The psyche is larger than the mind, older than reason, and wiser than our philosophies. To enter it is to encounter the living myth of being, the interplay of forces that have shaped humanity since time began. The second terrifying depth of the soul is the confrontation with the shadow, that unseen companion who walks beside us from birth to death. The shadow is not merely the sum of our sins. It is everything we have refused to live. It is the unlived life, the passions, the impulses, the truths that our consciousness has cast into exile. Each time we repress a thought, déni, a décider, or silence, an instinct, we add another stone to the wall that separates us from our own wholeness. The shadow grows in that darkness. It feeds on our denial until one day it breaks through the surface. When that happens, we often call it fate. We meet it in the form of misfortune, betrayal, conflict, or the collapse of what we thought was certain. In truth, it is not fate that has struck us, but ourselves the part of us we would not acknowledge. The shadow comes to restore balance, to remind us that what we reject does not vanish, but waits. The moral danger is not in having a shadow, but in refusing to know it. The one who denies his own capacity for evil becomes its servant. He projects his darkness onto others, seeing in them the malice, greed, or cruelty. He will not admit in himself. Thus wars are fought, lovers destroy one another, and nations persecute the very qualities they secretly harbor. But the one who turns inward, who dares to meet the shadow with honesty, discovers a strange mercy. For in that darkness lies energy raw, creative and potent. What was once repressed can become transformed. The very instincts that once threatened to destroy consciousness can now serve its expansion. This transformation, however, demands the courage to suffer. The modern mind is terrified of suffering. It seeks to avoid it, to anesthetize itself with distraction, to flee from pain, as if pain were the enemy. But suffering is the fire that purifies consciousness. It burns away illusion and pride. Without it, there is no growth. Every true psychological transformation passes through the crucible of despair. For despair strips us bare and forces us to confront what we are without pretense. Here we encounter the third terrifying depth of the soul, the experience of inner division, of being torn between light and dark, between love and hatred, between what we are and what we could be. The soul is not unified at the beginning. It is a battlefield. The ancient Persians were not wrong when they imagined the cosmos as a struggle between good and evil. That same struggle rages within each of us. The danger lies not in the existence of opposites, but in our refusal to hold them together. Psychologically, this conflict manifests as tension and unbearable pressure between opposing desires. The ego longs for resolution, for simplicity, but the psyche demands complexity. It demands that we endure the tension until a higher synthesis can emerge. This is the process I have called the transcendent function, the capacity of the psyche to unite opposites through the emergence of a new symbol. When one truly suffers this tension consciously, when one does not escape into fanaticism or despair, something miraculous begins to occur. A new level of awareness dawns. It is as if the light of consciousness deepens and becomes more compassionate, more encompassing. The opposites do not vanish. They are reconciled in a wider understanding. In this, we begin to sense the workings of the self, the totality that seeks expression through us. But this reconciliation often feels like madness. The fourth depth of the soul is the experience of dissolution, when the structures of the known self collapse and the boundaries between conscious and unconscious blur. It is as though one stands at the edge of a great sea, watching the waves erase the footprints of one's former identity. Many who come to this threshold retreat in terror. They fear they are losing their minds, and indeed, if one resists the process, madness can ensue. But if one surrenders not in passivity but in trust, the dissolution becomes renewal. In this is the death of the hero. The old self must die so that the new can be born. This death is not symbolic. It is existential. One feels it in the deepest part of being the shattering of certainty, the loss of meaning, the collapse of everything that once provided security. It is the nigredo of the alchemists, the black night of the soul. And yet, hidden within this night is the secret of transformation. When one has lost everything, even the illusion of control, one becomes open to the guidance of the unconscious. Dreams begin to speak with clarity. Synchronicities multiply, as if the outer world responds to the movement of the inner. The psyche reveals its unity with life itself. What was once experienced as chaos begins to reveal a pattern out of darkness. A new order is born, not imposed by the ego, but emerging from the self. It is here, in this mysterious renewal, that we encounter the fifth and deepest depth of the soul, the encounter with the divine within. This is the ultimate terror, because it is the ultimate intimacy. To meet the self is to stand before the numinous, the living mystery that transcends the individual. The ego experiences it as overwhelming, even annihilating, for it realizes that it is not the center of existence. The self is larger, older, infinite. It is the God image in the soul, not the deity of dogma or creed, but the eternal principle of order and meaning that underlies all being. The ancients called this encounter gnosis, a direct knowing of the divine, but such knowledge cannot be grasped intellectually. It is experienced as awe, as surrender, as participation in something eternal. One feels simultaneously humbled and exalted, diminished and fulfilled. The opposites dissolve in unity. Life and death, light and shadow, good and evil, all are seen as expressions of the same totality. Few reach this depth consciously, for it demands the sacrifice of everything the ego clings to. But those who do find that fear itself dissolves, for what is there to fear when one has seen that even death is part of the whole? The terror of the unconscious gives way to reverence. The soul, once divided, becomes whole. Yet the path does not end there. Having glimpsed the self, one must return to the world not as a saint or a prophet, but as a human being transformed. One must live the truth that was revealed, embody it in the small, difficult moments of daily life. Individuation is not escape from the world. It is full participation in it, guided now by a deeper awareness. But I must warn you, the deeper one goes into the soul, the greater the responsibility. Knowledge of the unconscious is not to be taken lightly. It confers power, the power to understand oneself and others, but that power is dangerous if not tempered by humility. For the unconscious is not ours to command. We are its servants. To use its insights for domination or pride is to fall into inflation, the delusion that one is divine rather than merely participating in the divine. Many a mystic and many a madman have stumbled on this threshold, so we must remain grounded, rooted in the earth. In relationship, in honest work, the spiritual journey is not meant to make us superhuman, but more fully human. Wholeness does not mean perfection. It means the ability to hold the light and the dark, the divine and the animal in a single embrace, and Perhaps this is the greatest paradox of all, that the most terrifying truths of the soul are also the most liberating. To face the darkness within is to reclaim the light that was hidden there. To accept one's limitations is to touch the infinite. To die to the old self is to be born into the wholeness of being. When we have journeyed into the darkest regions of the soul and glimpsed the light that burns even there, something within us shifts forever. We are no longer as we were. The world no longer appears as mere matter, but as the living mirror of the psyche. The mountains, the rivers, the stars, they all speak in symbols. We begin to sense that existence itself is a dialogue between the inner and the outer, between man and the cosmos. What we once thought of as coincidence now feels like participation in a mysterious conversation. But this realization is not an escape into mysticism, it is a deepening of reality. To live symbolically does not mean to live in fantasy, it means to perceive meaning woven into the fabric of life. Every event, every encounter, every sorrow becomes an image through which the unconscious speaks. The ordinary world becomes a sacred text, and we, its readers, must learn to decipher its language. The soul, in its depth, does not speak with logic. It speaks in images, in feelings, in dreams. The dream is not a deception of the mind, it is the oldest voice of life, whispering truths that the waking ego has forgotten. To ignore the dream is to silence the oracle within. To listen to it with reverence is to begin a dialogue with the unseen dimension of being. This dialogue, however, demands patience. The unconscious is not a servant that obeys our demands. It is a mystery that reveals itself only to those who wait, who approach it with humility and devotion. It may lead us into confusion, into pain, even into despair, but always toward meaning. Every descent into the unconscious carries the seed of renewal, just as winter carries the seed of spring. Yet, modern man stands estranged from this inner world. He worships the outer technology, speed, progress, while neglecting the silent spaces within. He fears stillness, because in stillness the shadows emerge, but without stillness there is no encounter with the soul. We are surrounded by noise not because the world demands it, but because our own emptiness does. The unconscious cannot reach us if we never fall silent enough to hear its voice. You see, the terrifying truth is not that the unconscious exists, it is that it rules us from within. When we remain unconscious of it, most people are driven not by choice, but by compulsion. They repeat the same patterns, suffer the same wounds, attract the same conflicts, all while believing themselves free. Only when we stop and listen, when we face the hidden motives that direct our lives, can we begin to act consciously. And this awareness is costly. It strips away illusions. It shows us the masks we have worn, the personas that have protected us but also imprisoned us. The persona is necessary, for we must live in society, but it is not the self. It is the face we show to the world, not the one we wear in solitude. When a man identifies with his mask, he becomes hollow. He mistakes role for reality and applause for love. To withdraw from this identification feels like dying. Yet, It is only through such death that one comes closer to authenticity. We must allow the false selves to fall away. As leaves fall from the tree in autumn, beneath them lies something truer, the living root of the psyche, the place from which genuine life grows. At this stage, one begins to sense the presence of the anima or animus, that inner figure who bridges the conscious and unconscious realms. The anima appears to the man as the image of woman. But she is not a woman of flesh and blood, she is the soul itself, the gateway to the depths. To the woman, the animus appears as the spirit. The inner voice of reason or inspiration, these figures are not fantasies, but living symbols of the psyche's polarity. They are guides, but also deceivers, for they reflect both our highest aspiration and our deepest longing. To relate rightly to them is to learn the art of inner relationship, of dialogue with what is within. For the psyche is not a monologue, it is a community of voices. To live consciously is to participate in that dialogue, to honor each voice without being possessed by any. The one who integrates these opposites, who unites the feminine and the masculine within, approaches psychic wholeness. But few can bear such wholeness. The ego resists it, fearing loss of control. It prefers to live divided, to cling to certainty, even if that certainty is false. Yet, life does not permit stagnation. The unconscious will not rest until it is known. It will send dreams, symptoms, accidents, and encounters, each a messenger, each an opportunity for awakening. The self, the center of the total psyche, seeks realization through the individual. It is not content with partial truths. It draws us onward through suffering and joy alike toward greater consciousness. This movement toward wholeness is what I have called individuation. It is not self-improvement, nor the pursuit of happiness. It is the slow unfolding of the soul's destiny. Each person carries within them a pattern, a seed of potential, what the ancients called the daimon or the genius. It is this inner pattern that draws us towards certain experiences, that shapes the story of our lives. To resist it is to live half a life haunted by what might have been. To follow it is to enter the mystery of being, to become who we are meant to be. But here lies another terror. To live one's own life fully means to walk a path that no one else can walk. It means to abandon imitation, to risk misunderstanding, rejection, loneliness. Most people would rather conform than awaken, because awakening demands sacrifice, the sacrifice of belonging to the herd. Yet the soul cannot thrive in imitation. It demands authenticity, even if authenticity costs everything. As one nears the deeper stages of individuation, a strange peace begins to arise. It is not the peace of comfort, but the peace of alignment. When the outer and inner worlds begin to mirror one another, one begins to see that the opposites were never enemies, but partners in a divine play. The shadow, once feared, becomes an ally. The suffering, once resisted, becomes the very path to consciousness. The wounds become openings through which light enters. At this point, the terrifying becomes sacred. The abyss that once threatened to devour us now reveals itself as the womb of transformation. we realize that every descent has been a preparation for ascent, that death and rebirth are not opposites, but rhythms of the same eternal pulse. And so the soul, having traversed its depths, emerges not triumphant, but humbled, radiant, not with pride, but with quiet knowing. It has seen the truth that life is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. What then remains? Only this: to live consciously, to love deeply, to suffer honestly, to serve the unfolding of the whole. For in serving the whole, we serve ourselves. And in knowing ourselves, we come closer to the divine that seeks expression through us. And so, my friends, if there is one message I would leave you with tonight, it is this: do not fear the depths of your soul. Do not flee from the darkness within. The terror you feel is the threshold of transformation. The night you dread is the same night in which the stars are born. There is no path to wholeness that avoids suffering, no awakening without the dark. The task is not to escape the unconscious, but to become its conscious witness, to stand in the tension of opposites until a new light emerges. In doing so, you become a vessel of life's deeper wisdom, a participant in the eternal process of creation. And when the time comes that you look into the mirror and no longer see merely your reflection, but the mystery that gazes back through you, then you will know that the journey was not in vain. For the self has found you, and through you, the universe knows itself. So I ask you, before we part, when the voice of the darkness calls to you in the quiet hours, will you run from it? Or will you listen and answer?